3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R., and joining me for this episode is Raymond Szymanski. Raymond, how you doing, sir?
Fabulous. You even got the name right. Good job.
I actually like the name because based it on the spelling and the way it's pronounced, I like the name.
Thank you.
I have a very ordinary name, so.
Really, like Smith and Jones, huh?
Yeah, I mean it's Rodriguez. It literally is a Smith and Jones of the Latin world, right? So.
Yep, absolutely.
Before let's dive right in. What got you involved with the research of ufology?
1973, I was a cooperative education student from the University of Detroit. And when a co-op student comes in, they're always assigned somebody who's usually a mid-level employee in whatever kind of field they're studying. And so there were 4 of us who came in from the university to do this work study, and we would be alternating 4 months at Wright-Patterson, then 4 months at school, 4 months at Wright-Patterson. And we would do that till we had 3 work study sessions done. And I was assigned a mid-level engineer, and his name was Al. And about the first week, it was January 1973, Al said, hey, let's go through the hangar into the next building, and there's a coffee shop there. He called it the Greasy Spoon. And he said, hey, I'll buy you like a candy bar, like a welcoming gift. So our 2-story business office was connected to a full hangar, like 250 feet long, which housed airplanes, of course, for the Air Force. And then attached to the other end of that hangar was a mirror image of the building that I worked in. And in that mirror image, 2-story business building was the Greasy Spoon. So we stepped from our building down this little ramp into what was really dark, huge, heavy blue curtains blocking the thousands of little windows on this hangar, nothing but spiders. And he turns to me and says, have you heard about our aliens?
Huh. And this is this is obviously, it's not a private hangar, right? You were saying it's Air Force related?
Yeah, I'm at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base at the moment that this happens, and I'm a cooperative education student at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base,
Right.
The famous Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so he lets me in that he's knowledgeable, and other people on the base are knowledgeable, that when I asked him, he said, yeah, in the 40s, there was a crash out west, and they brought the machine, the recovered machine, and the occupants here to Wright-Patterson for evaluation and possible exploitation. Now, I'm supposed to be, living and dying and breathing every word of this mid-level engineer because he's my mentor and he's, got a good reputation. In fact, Al went on to become a member of the Senior Executive Service. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, in civil service, they used to have what was called the general schedule, the GS scale, and engineers could go up to a GS 15. But there was a special little rung above that called Senior Executive Service, which was the equivalent of an Air Force general or a Navy admiral. So it's a very prestigious assignment, promotion, and all of those SES positions and promotions are congressionally approved. So it's very, very prestigious. And this man actually went on to become a member of the SES, but back in 73, he tells me, we've got aliens. So I asked him, well, okay, I'll play along. Where are these aliens? And he said, well, they keep them in the tunnels. Now, this is happening as we're walking from our business office through this really dark hangar. I mean, this is Hollywood stuff. So I said, well, can we go see these aliens in the hangar? Well, no, we can't. He said, well, why not, Al? Well, it's a secret.
Huh, you're better than me because I'd already been running over there.
Yeah, and I was just trying to keep my cool. I said, well, Al, if it's a secret, how do you know about it? And then he told me, he said, well, really the base is aware of the connection between Wright-Patterson and aliens and flying saucers because Project Blue Book had been hosted by the Foreign Technology Division, which was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And there were always newspaper articles in the local papers and those that were readily available in the area, like from Cincinnati or Columbus, that knew about the Wright-Patterson connection through Project Blue Book. And if you go back like Dayton Daily News, you'll find tons of stories, as I've had. In fact, I have a friend who had a whole folder of clippings that I just returned to him after using them to produce my latest book. So that was well known, and he was telling me all about that kind of connection. So from that point forward, I would ask people like Doug in accounting, Doug, Al told me this thing about these aliens in the tunnel, and people would smile, but they'd say, oh yeah, there was a crash and they brought the aliens. Now, it wasn't that convincing, but everyone was consistent in the story, so I knew it was part of the Wright-Patterson fabric.
So that being said, at that moment, for me, when you're hearing someone, and this guy clearly being groomed for something great, who goes on to become something great, when you hear this, it compels you to think outside of what you normally would think, right? The impressive part of that is it's not uncommon. I've heard this before in a lot of different interviews where someone on location they'll be in the know about something and they'll speak about it nonchalantly, but they'll also recognize the authority behind it. That's why I always say for the government to suppress a secret for, decades, it's not possible. There's human error. I don't care what you come from, if you're the general or the janitor, human error is going to be at play, and curiosity is at play as well. And you can't suppress someone their whole life. Eventually they're going to speak.
That's true. Because if we fast forward just momentarily to my latest book, Swamp Gas My Ass.
Where do they find it? Where can we find that book?
Amazon.
On Amazon. I'm going to put links to that in the description, by the way.
Oh, that's terrific. And if I haven't already, I think I have, I'll send you some book covers, the actual 600 DPI resolution, prints of those covers, of all three covers. And so, you can use them, put them up. But where was I going with this?
Swamp Gas My Ass.
Oh, yes. And people talking. Well, the hero of that book is a person by the name of Gary Kent Carroll, who unfortunately passed away on the 18th of November at the age of 85. But Gary had kept a secret from everybody for 55 years. And that secret was that in 1966, when the swamp gas UFOs were flying over southeastern Michigan, he was a F-106 pilot stationed with the 71st Fighter Interceptor Squadron at Selfridge Air Force Base, which literally was having flyovers by UFOs during that same time period. In fact, if you go to contemporary news articles, they say, the public affairs official from Selfridge said that personnel spotted these items themselves. But Gary was scrambled in his jet one day, and Gary and his wingman, Colonel Bob Nicholson, they actually intercepted this UFO, saw it on visual with their own eyeballs, and actually each of them in their own F-106 captured it on radar. But Gary held that secret for 55 years, and the only reason that I found out about it is because I discovered him and convinced him to tell me the story, and coincidentally, he already knew that he was suffering from terminal cancer.
Right. And yeah, I find that to be very common, where they're like, look, I'm at the end of my road. I'm speaking this because what are they going to do? Put me in jail?
Precisely. And so your comment that, the word would slip out, through the decades, it has slipped out, but most people who were involved, let's say in the Roswell thing, the first peep of Roswell, didn't happen until 1978. Now that's 31 years after the incident, and people were just different then, and they, maybe they held their secrets tighter. There was more patriotism, less cynicism. So Jesse Marcel, who's the one who told Stanton Friedman about it, and that's where they broke the story open. He had heard somewhere or saw a tabloid that mentioned the government and flying saucers. So he thought that the veil of secrecy had been lowered, and that things time out after decades and they declassify things. So he openly talked to Friedman, and then he discovered, to his horror afterwards, that the lid hadn't been lifted. So, yeah, people can keep secrets for a long time.
Yeah, also, back then, 70s, 80s, 90s, even 90s, there's a lot of naysayers about ufology, a lot of them. But fast forward to 2017 and the government releases those videos, I don't care who you are. You can't deny it. It's undeniable that with the performance of those vehicles. I just had a conversation with Steve Murr yesterday discussing, the idea of how to use propulsion and frequency. The point I make of this is, once upon a time, you could turn around and say, well, that's nonsense. Where's the evidence? When you see those military videos, and that's for me, that's when I knew I wanted to learn more. Because when our military is saying, what the hell is that? That should be a flag right there. What's driving it? I don't know. I personally don't know what's driving it. I have my theories, right? Like my theory on the small gray aliens. I think they're advanced biomechanical robots with a consciousness upload. And that the beings that control them sit, somewhere relevantly further away, because I make room for the idea that they can't breathe here. They can't exist in our atmosphere. Most people that speak of the larger aliens are the ones that seem more biological. They almost, to me, seem like they're not really there physically, right? Like and I say these things, if you look at our current technology, whether it be fun or military application, there's things that we've experimented with that we've used in the past that today is more used for practical use, for fun, right? That who knows what an advanced life form would be using, right? For as far as there was a concert with Tupac. I said this a lot. He was legitimately on that stage, but he wasn't on that stage. It's projections. And then now imagine, put another 1,000 years on technology where you could, like some of the movies we were watching could be real, like cell phone concept. I believe this cell phone concept came from Star Trek. The idea of it anyhow. So that being said, yeah.
Especially when they were flip phone styles, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the Trekkies had. They had the flip phones.
I remember having the Motorola StarTech, the flip phone, and thinking look at it, like, this is just like Star Trek. So
exactly. And how many things did they do there that now seem much more in the realm of possibility?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's everything you see in movies somewhere long ago. Now it's more practical. It's real. So that I always tell people, before you cast doubt on something, understand what we consider to be technology versus what we consider to be black technology, things not released. Like an example would be GPS was practical applications for military use for a very long time, long before we got it. Same with the internet. It's how they were communicating with the military. Most things that we use for fun today was a military application long before. It's just the facts. You had done extensive research into Travis Walton. To touch that subject, Travis Walton to me is what I would do. I think Travis saw something extraordinary and ran right up to it and got injured. And, and I said this a lot of times on the show as well. I think that we're under constant observation. I think we're the National Geographic's channel for aliens. And so humans, when we're out in the wild and we're observing animals, we're not to interfere. It's nature. Even if they're being attacked by something else, we can't get involved unless that animal gets hurt on, let's say, one of our Jeeps. Now we're obligated. It's not natural to their environment for the Jeep to be there. It's injured. We have to fix it. I think the same applies to what happened with Travis and the aliens in that scenario.
I think Travis Walton is one of the top witnesses ever. And the fact that the 6 loggers that were with him and all witnessed this, and they all told a very, very, very comprehensive, consistent story. They passed, reams of lie detector tests through the years. Their story, the guys that were paid by the government, like Philip Klass, for example, who tried to bribe them with up to $10,000. And, back then in the 70s, that was a lot of money. But
Right.
the people who were controlling the narrative definitely did not want the Travis Walton story to become corroborated by anybody. And so, they did everything they could to break down the story on Travis, and again made exorbitant bribes to witnesses who were there with him at that moment, and it never broke down. So, his story is incredible. I find it very credible. I did spend. I have been with Travis a couple times socially at conferences or, at a group dinner. In my first book, actually, there's a photograph of all of us at a table together. And I did get to spend a long afternoon and evening with him when we drove from Heber, Arizona, about 10 or 12 miles into the Patsy Sitgreaves National Forest, where his incident took place. And then I did a photographic study, which was later embedded in the movie Travis, which was done by Jennifer Stein. And I got to spend that afternoon, evening with Travis, got to talk to him all that time. And then a very strange moment as the sun was going down, and it was just about that kind of moment, that time of day, when his incident happened, that, I was shooting these tree stumps, and it was all part of this, kind of pseudo-scientific documentary of the anomalous growth that these trees went through because of perhaps their exposure to the radiation of the craft. But it got really strange because Travis just started talking. And he really wasn't saying much. He was just like pointing out a tree stump going, photograph this and photograph this. And then this just time of day hit. And he starts pointing. He said, back then, 1975, he said, this is where it started. There's an old logging road there. He said, you can't see it now, but goes, if you see that little tree line there, well, that's where we were. And we're standing, he goes, and we're looking up to where we're standing right now. And he says, we're looking up at this spot, and somebody spots a fire. So we think, hey, we need to go see this because we're loggers. And, if they burn down the forest, we don't have a job. So we decided to go up there and look. And he tells me the entire story as we're standing there on the spot that he had the incident, and the bolt hit him and he fell back, and the guys fled and came back to retrieve him. And it was like, now, I don't know if you've ever been to a place like the Anne Frank house.
No.
Okay, so Anne Frank was the Jewish girl who her family was hidden away by a Dutch family, behind her home, and the Nazis eventually came and got them. And, it's a famous story. Well, when you visit the Anne Frank house, as I did with some friends, it's a religious experience. You can't explain it. You're almost having an out-of-body experience because you're reliving what you know about the incident, and you're putting yourself there, and you can almost hear the voices of the soldiers coming in to get them. Well, that was the way it was with Travis. But his voice was the one was narrating my out-of-body experience there, looking around, the sun's going down, it's February when we're there, so it's really cool. And having that as an experience really puts you inside somewhat his experience, and you can't come away from that unaffected.
Yeah, it's almost like a sense of euphoria, right? It's a very interesting subject. The focus of the subject is standing right by you, and knowing the gravity of what he went through versus the history there, I could see that. What you said earlier makes sense. I'll tell you why. I knew a lot about World War II from what I've studied and read, school, etc. It wasn't until in this last week, I watched this documentary where it literally showed the graphic detail of those camps, and it tore the heart out of my chest. I was weeping. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's one thing to learn something and hear about it versus then there's that visual, and you're right. Based upon what you learned and now you're seeing it, you're feeling for those individuals. You're putting yourself in that place. So I completely understand what you mean by that. For Travis, how did he seem when he was there? Like, did he seem uncomfortable or?
Every time I've seen Travis, he looks like he's going to jump out of his skin. And I don't care where I see him. My impression, again, this is just, Ray's singular opinion, is he always looks like he's reliving that in his head. And I don't think I mentioned this in my first book when I wrote about that afternoon and evening, because after it got dark and we didn't want to be up there any longer because one, it was getting really cold. Travis was dressed in almost business attire with dress shoes, dress pants, and a leather jacket. We decided to repair back to my hotel room for a few minutes, go to the bathroom, and then have dinner together. One thing I found really kind of strange is, it was a nice hotel. I think it was like, there's only like one hotel in Heber, like a Days Inn or something, but it's a fairly nice place. And when we got into the room, I was heading like right to the bathroom. I noticed when we got in the room, he closed the door and he put the chain lock on.
Huh.
Now, there is no crime in Heber, Arizona. Okay. There's zero.
Right.
Because there's like 10 people in the whole town. And it was that little moment there that made me cognizant of the fact, or convinced me, corroborated my thoughts earlier, that he's always thinking he's going to be abducted again at any moment.
Right.
I mean, yeah, why would you lock the door like that?
Whether he's come to terms with what happened or not, people don't seem to understand is when you have a traumatic event in your life, and it doesn't matter what it is. Like an example, I injured my leg pretty significantly back in 2003. I mean, very significantly. And every single time I think of that injury to my leg, I cringe every time. I mean, I'll give you an idea what happened. My leg was split from the knee all the way down to my ankle, wide open.
Oh.
Yeah. And every time, even now talking about it, I cringe. It was a very traumatic thing for me. I had to lay myself down and cut my own blood supply off, have friends call an ambulance. So that being said, now scale it up 1,000%. You've been taken, whatever the reason may be, whether you hurt yourself or they took you, you've been taken against your will, and you're being messed with by things that you don't quite understand. Sure. Yeah, the rest of your life. And what he's doing by putting the locks on the door, that's a psychological safety measure. Everyone does this. Everyone does it. In some way or another, we do it. I mean, if you agree with that.
But the way he did it in the room, in a place that is as safe as anything. I mean, I really didn't even need to lock my door when I left for all those hours with him. To me, that place was like just super safe up in the mountains there. But I've seen Travis many times at conferences and that sort of thing. I like at a conference, my table was back to back with his, so I had a lot of time to talk with him. My table has been across from his, and I've been able to watch him, how he interacts. It's just like, and he's a brave guy, but it's just like the expression on his face is saying to me, I'm still worried about this thing. So, I really do think that his story and his book, if you've ever read his book, Fire in the Sky, it is awesome. It's one of my top 5 all-time UFO books.
When I was a kid, that movie scared the shit out of me. Even though later on I find out that they made it a little more fantastical than what it needed to be, but even so, that movie, the visuals of that movie, that ruined me for a little bit. I was a kid. Imagine going to bed after seeing that. I had to sneak that movie too, if I recall. That wasn't something on the list of things for the parents to let you watch, but I was watching it. And so, yeah, I could, when you describe Travis's state, sure, for the rest of his life, psychological, the human psyche is a strange thing, and it could really run away with you. I mean, an example would be, for me, I'm one of these people, pretty smart guy. So when I get sick, if it's something even minor, before you know it, I'm examining myself and I'm making, I'm making symptoms, like, and then before you know it, there's a prognosis, and it went from being you had a cold to it's a full blown disease, and that's hypochondria, right? And that's how powerful the mind can be. You have to reel it in a little bit. So for him, I imagine the rest of his life, that's always going to be there. Like I said earlier about the traumatic event with my leg, that's forever. And then you scale it up to what he went through. Yeah, I don't know. Has he tried any sort of hypnosis, perhaps like maybe suppress it?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure that he's undergone regressions, and that does relieve some things. And, here's the guy, though, who he's constantly reminded of it. He never has a moment to forget about it because, just look him up on his website or whatever. Every week he's flying somewhere across the country to do another UFO Congress. He's probably, in the top 3 of people who are invited. And he has agents that work for him, that book him and that sort of thing. So he never really gets a chance to put that behind him. And it has been lucrative for him. But, if I were to evaluate that and someone goes, oh, here, Ray, here's the deal. You're going to be abducted. First of all, you're going to be hit with about, 20,000 volts of lightning and enough amperage, to make it worth its while. It's going to lift you 10 feet up and blow you 10 feet back. You're essentially going to be dead. You're going to have third-degree burns all over your body. You're going to be on a alien spaceship with creatures that eventually you'll describe to be extremely ugly, and they're poking you and prodding you, and they've got you in this gel, and you got it in your mouth, and you think you're going to choke. However, you're going to make the rest of your living by retelling this story every weekend, at least twice for the rest of your life, but you'll make a good living at it. My response would be, that's a hard pass.
Yeah, honestly, because if I had to sit there and tell people about my leg daily, every day, I'd be disgusted. Because again, even think about it now, I still cringe at it. Looking back at the Travis story, his friends, when he was gone, if they were lying, when they were being brought up on homicide charges, I think that'd have been the time like, all right, listen, man, we're kidding, not real. I think they would have broke there, and they didn't. And unfortunately for Travis, it's kind of important for him to do these. I need people to understand this too. It's important for him to do these conferences. There are people out there that don't have a voice. They've experienced some things in their lives. They're not entirely comfortable with speaking with, per se, the neighbor. So it's good for him to have a conference and speak about his experiences. And it's like immunotherapy in a way, right? You go there, you face it, someone else is speaking about it, and it gives you a sense of comfort. It gives you that sense of you're not alone, right? I think what he does is important, and it's good. It's good for study as well, because if we suppress it, you're not going to get science from it. You can never get science from silence. It's impossible. So I think it's important.
Are you familiar at all with my first book, which was originally entitled 50 Shades of Grays?
No, so I have this thing I do. I do everything in my power to not learn about my guest. So this way it becomes more of an organic conversation. But then afterward, I usually buy their books, or I look like yours, for example. I'm going to be getting your books. I'm going to go through them. Then I'm going to call you again, and then we're going to be on a podcast again, because I'm going to have a ton of questions. All right.
Well, I wanted to support your last statement there. I wrote my first book with a lot of humor in it, because I wanted the folks who read it not to be intimidated by the subject matter. It's really not, as with traumatic experiences like Travis had, that this would scare some people. So my first book was written in a humorous vein, and one of the 4 endorsements that I received from the top UFO researchers was Preston Dennett. And Preston Dennett's endorsement, which of course is printed on the back cover, said, "This is laugh out loud funny." And so the first book is kind of like a nice introduction for people because it's very palatable. And then the second 2 books were written because it's the subject matter I know will help people. In book 2, Victoria's Secret Truth, it's about a person who had abduction experiences her entire life. And it took me a year to convince her to do that book. And I finally convinced her when I told her, hey, this is going to help other people who have had similar experiences.
Yeah. I mean, that's why therapy exists, by the way. Group therapy. It's for that purpose. So other people don't walk into a room feeling like, oh, I'm the only one. You don't want to feel isolated. And so they create these groups so people feel comfortable, and it's necessary. And it's why I applaud Travis. For one, think about his era when that story first broke. Think about the ridicule he goes through. You know what I mean? That's why when people say, oh, he's lying, there's no way he's lying. He did not put himself through all of that to later profit. He didn't profit then. There was no book deal, no movie deal. None of that existed when this all happened. This was years after the fact when this story became interesting and it was more acceptable. This guy put himself through a lot. He went through a lot. His team members and his friends went through a lot. So for him to, again, for the group therapy, and to your point, yeah, it's very important. And then here's another thing I say. It's a double-edged sword. I personally have witnessed nothing UFO related or ghost or otherwise. I'm going to go out and do a documentary. That I'm going to do. And if I find something, great. If I don't, great. Documentary might be boring, but I'm going to go out there and look. So people are like, do you think they're real? Well, for me, the answer UFOs after the military release, absolutely. You can't deny. I had a feeling prior to that, because I one day sat down and thought about the universe. And then I thought about the outer universe, and it felt really small, and thought to myself, there's no shot. There's nothing living elsewhere, even if it's primitive. So I'd say to these same people, they're like, well, there's no such thing as UFOs. And I say to them, prove it. Get out there, do some research, and prove to me they're not real. At the same time as the people out there trying to get the real proof because they have a belief, those of you who don't believe, get out there and show us they're not real. Prove it to us. And that's going to be my answer every time. You have significant research under your belt. What have you found in your research that's given you some sort of concrete evidence in your mind anyway?
Well, let's work backwards. Colonel Gary Kent Carroll obviously was a full bird colonel. That's the guy who gets to wear the eagles on his shoulder for the Air Force. The man had over 5,000 hours flying America's top jet fighters. He was in charge of Air Forces Iceland at one time, and their job, they were the first line of defense should the Soviet Union want to come bomb the United States. He was also the head of the East Coast sector for air defense, meaning the security of the entire East Coast was under his supervision. And it goes on and on with his credentials, all the way back to the cockpit. So when I discovered Colonel Carroll, and he agreed only after reading my first two books, I should add, he wanted to make sure that I was legit. And the fact that I worked at Wright-Patterson for 40 years kind of gave me some street cred with him. He decided to tell me his story. And so evidence-wise, what we did is I used over 30 hours of recorded interviews. He gave me full access to his military records, of which I have official copies of, meaning not Xeroxes, but stamped, embossed copies given to him by the Department of Defense. He gave me access to all of his records. And using that, I could prove that he was a pilot, that he did do the intercept, that his credentials showed clearly that he was the pilot. Records I looked at proved that he was where he said he was, doing what he said he was. And then he would, test me sometimes and say, well, I landed a F-106 on one wheel at Selfridge in May of 1965, and the Secretary of Defense happened to be on the base. And after I, ran from the wreckage, he was there to thank me. And I went, this is a fantastical story. This, what an imagination. And guess what? I found a newspaper article that said exactly that with his photo in it, telling how he landed this F-106 on one wheel and how the Secretary of Defense happened to be in Detroit at the time doing a talk for the Air Forces Week or Armed Services Week, and how his airplane was back at Selfridge and he was heading back there with the base commander when they heard over the radio that there was this pilot flying around with no wheels to come home on.
Wow.
And so he would tell me these stories, and then he'd let me track the stuff down, and everything he told me. In fact, I had to get a formally classified top secret UMBRA, National Security Agency document, and verify a story that he told me.
Huh.
So
it puts you in a
yes.
position to know, right? So your research is it's science based, which is good, right? Because have you personally ever like witnessed a UFO or anything like that?
Yes.
So what that for you in that event, was it something you saw obviously in the air, right?
You remember your leg accident?
Yeah.
Well, a young man at a local university was test driving a big old Cadillac. He was going to buy it for like $500. What he didn't know is that it wasn't in the best condition. It was raining hard. It was the 16th of November, 2010. I was coming home from work and he ran a red light and I hit him.
Oof.
And I wound up with disc damage in my neck and blackout headaches and everything else. And I thought I was going to need spinal surgery, that sort of thing. So I had to have therapy. And in the ensuing months, now it's a little over a year later, I retired because of the accident. I couldn't work. I couldn't sit at a desk even and do computer work because the swelling in the discs were making me black out. So I was coming home from therapy. It was, I think, the 5th of December in 2011. I was coming towards my home, and we had one of these days where we get these weird low cloud levels. They're only like a couple hundred feet off the deck. Right. And sure enough, we had one of those. And I was about less than a mile from home, and I saw a craft, which I later was able to calculate was 90 feet across, and 200 feet in front of me, and only about 100 foot off the deck. And I watched it slip through an opening in the clouds, and then slip back into the cloud bank. Literally, I could have hit it with my 9-iron, and a Titleist.
Wow. That's seeing that's a changer. That changes you, right? Because now it goes from investigating to, I saw this, and now I really got to know. That's how I'd be. I got to know at that point.
Well, that's true, because just a couple months later, then I went to my first UFO Congress. I go, I'm retired. I've got to jump into this thing with both feet, because I had done investigation at Exeter, New Hampshire, famous 1965 sighting. 2 policemen and a guy by the name of Norman Muscarello are standing in the field, and this 100-foot UFO is a 90-foot UFO is 100 feet over their heads in a pasture with these lights going back in this certain pattern, and it's just sitting there motionless without sound, and they're watching it, and they watched it for like 20 minutes. And so I went back to that site. I found where that field was, and I found the farmhouses that the field was between. And I found a man living in a house, the Clyde Russell farmhouse, that's made famous in the book called Incident at Exeter by John Fuller. And wouldn't you know it, the 80-year-old man that answers the door is the son of Clyde, who was mentioned prominently in the famous book.
Wow. So what did that, so when you see this guy and you start talking to him, obviously you make it aware of what it is you're researching. What's his response to that?
He says, "Follow me." And he takes me out to his driveway, and I know the story backwards, forwards, because I knew months in advance that I was going to the Exeter area, and I read the John Fuller book, maybe 2 or 3 times in between. So he takes me in the driveway, and I've got my camera with me because, I want to shoot photos. And in fact, there's a photo that I'm going to describe right now that is sitting in a shadow box. And in that shadow box are 4 photographs from that day that I was there with Arthur Russell, and a first edition copy that Arthur signed for me of the incident at Exeter. He signed it and dated it. And the photo shows him pointing. And what he was doing is we were standing out in front of the farmhouse and the garage, and he's pointing, and he says that Norman knocked on the door, but it was like 2 a.m. and his dad didn't answer it because they thought it was a local drunk. So Norman eventually got a ride into town, but he described the UFO, where it was, where Norman was standing. He then takes me down a couple 100 feet down towards the property that slopes towards this creek. And he says, this is where the UFO was hiding out during the day. And then he points to some power lines and he said, and we think that it was tapping the power from these grids. And so I got to spend the day with Arthur Russell, who then, after he got past he trusted me. He started to trust me. And I was filling him in on some of the details and asking him a lot of good questions. He took me around and introduced me to people who were also witnesses to that UFO in 1965, but couldn't report it. They didn't want to be part of the book because they held prominent positions in the community.
Yep. That's more common than you know. I mean, I do a lot of off podcast interviews. I speak to a lot of people. A lot of these people I speak to are business professionals, lawyers, doctors, cops. I get to hear about their experiences. Obviously I don't release their names but I hear a lot of these people speak about this and they say the same thing. Even now, they're like, we don't want to be, we'll get into that category. We don't want to be bothered. And they're afraid of scrutiny. And it's, look, me, again, not to go over that again. The military is speaking this. The government's speaking this. The videos are released today. We should be, grown up enough to say this is a real thing and we could speak about it no matter whom you are. It shouldn't affect if tomorrow a doctor saw a shooting star and went to work and said, I saw a shooting star, which could very well be space debris, you shouldn't ridicule the guy. He saw something, right? And you would hope that people would be a little more understanding, but unfortunately, we're still not there yet. We're still not there yet, which brings me to another subject, the government. And why are they not? Why did they cover up then? And why the disclosure now, the safe disclosure? Cover up then made more sense. I think organized religion was more prominent. And I think if you would have came out and said there's life somewhere else, I think that would have caused a big problem amongst religion anyway, right? People were not ready to handle that. I know people now, friends and relatives that are Christian, and in their eyes, it's God made here and there's only here, and they refuse to believe. They only can walk in front of them and they just won't believe. They're going to be, that's the devil. There's no doubt about it. It's the devil, right? So right. That plays a big role. Now, this disclosure, why are we giving so much information? Why is the government talking about releasing more? I even read something that they're going to speak about metamaterials obtained and possible biological study. I'll tell you why. Private industry is going to space. The billionaires are going up, and someone like Jeff Bezos gets up there and let's say he sees a UFO and they record it. You think he's going to suppress that? That's viral the next day. TV shows will be made around it because that's how billionaires think. In fact, and I just said this to Steve Murr, if he discovers there's a civilization on another planet somewhere, in Jeff Bezos' mind, he's not going to be like, wow, that's amazing. He's going to think, how do I get Amazon over there?
That's right.
That's the goal. Right? Like Elon Musk. You think this guy cares about aliens? No. What's the technology they could give? That's what he cares about. And so it's the rest of humanity, that the people that are still racist and they're still divided by politics and religion, that insanity, I don't know. That's part of why government, if people want to know, if you want to know why the government's covering up, it's because of our behavior as a whole. The government still is kind of there to make sure we don't go overboard and implode. And then part of the other of it, I'm not sure. The rest of the cover up, I'm never really clear on that, other than some of it could be our projects that we want our enemies to be like, well, what do they got? Maybe it is them. That mystery, psychological warfare is one of the more powerful things in war. Would you agree?
I've never been to war.
Well, all right. So forget the idea of going to war, but between governments, there's a lot of game of psychology being played. What we have, what we don't have. We'll test this to scare you. Like that. That's a big part of what North Korea does. They're firing missiles to get a reaction. and maybe in their mind put us in check, which will never happen. But, you know, at the end of the day, the government cover-up, I could see why part of it would exist, again, because we're kind of responsible for the way we behave. And like I was saying, the disclosure, I don't know. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to get spoon-fed. That is until, again, one of these guys in a billionaire club come across something, and then now it's forced. And they have no choice. They got to speak to it. What is your opinion on government cover-up?
Wow. They actually did a really good job for about 74 years. And now, you know, for whatever reasons, you know, they've released those videos. I think, I don't know who made the decision. You know, we've got really good ideas as to why they covered it up for so long. And it is interesting that this 9-page Office of the Director of National Intelligence has really been soft pedaled. And I think 99% of the people don't know. I mean, the people of the world don't know that that document was released. And even fewer know how impactful it is, because in essence, what that 9-page report says is flying saucers are real.
Right. And
that's what it says after, you know, eternity of denial. But, you know, we're in the middle of COVID now. You know, this came on the heels of a highly controversial and very heated, you know, election and change of power. And I've never seen such ugliness, you know, between people who had political differences, and, you know, all of this, you know, people trying to burn down the country only to sway the votes. They didn't give a shit about, you know, what they were doing or any kind of political thing. All they wanted to do was make it bad enough to sway somebody's votes one way or another. And it was terrible. And so I think with all this COVID and all that political unrest and everything else, this was the perfect time to release that 9-page report, because all these people are unemployed and there's so much other things that we have to focus on for our survival, that this long range, it's not in my neighborhood kind of thing, just, you know, it had a 24-hour news cycle. That was it.
Yeah, and unfortunately the news feeds on that. That's their lifeblood. And that's a scary part of it. And
but it's gone.
Yeah.
That story is long gone.
Yep. You know, that's again, back to why the government should kind of like suppress. I don't know. We don't like each other. I know I say this a lot, and I don't mean to play a broken record, but I think we really got to start behaving like a species long before we even consider the idea of communicating with another one. It's crazy, because if you have the technology to, whether it be cross space or use portals or however it is they're getting here, you had to make that election as a species, because that's a lot of resources, a lot of time dedicated, a lot of technology put into it so they can watch Channel Earth. You have to behave like a species. You can't have division amongst you. And that's a big problem we have. And I said this to Steve and a few other people, I'm under the impression that perhaps there's maybe a lot of species of aliens, and they're renting these gray aliens as they're go to Earth and observe up close. You know, it's the irresponsibility of mainstream media and their need to make things more fantastic than what it is, to sensationalize it, is why we don't get proper coverage on this subject matter. It's why we had to go from UFO to UAP or whatever acronym we're going to have next year, because the stigma of the name itself is still very much tied to like comic books, you know, and movies. And so
I think they want to distance themselves from that other acronym, because then they would have to address the entire 75-year cover-up. Now, they very cleverly and very strategically said, well, you know, we're only concerning ourselves with, you know, starting in this year forward. And so they're basically washing their hands of 99.9% of the evidence that's out there that was collected by civilian agencies, and they want to control the entire narrative still by saying, well, the only thing we're really studying are these things that our guys are reporting, and it's classified and we can't tell you. And they're deep sixing it again. Mark my words. This thing is going back from whence it came.
That's a shame.
Yeah, you'll see. It's being buried in the intelligence community. It's going back from where it came.
That's a real shame. It's, again, the only thing that gives me any kind of real hope of a real disclosure is the Billionaire Club when they go up. Because somebody up there, look, if you put William Shatner to space, which we've done, and other celebrities are like, well, we want to go to space, and they're bringing their phones or whatever recording device to document the experience, and they all spot something, better believe that's going right to YouTube.
How many books have you read on UFOs and ETs and abduction? 1, 5, 7, 10, 100? How many?
I've only recently got involved with it in the last couple of years of researching it. So I've only been through about 4 good books. And then the rest have been documentaries, and I'm constantly vetting the documentary.
Okay, great. And I'm not trying to set you up for anything. I'm just trying to get an idea, because I will want to couch my answer in terms of your experience. You're talking about disclosure. I want to put this in perspective for you, because maybe this will save you a lot of time. The evidence that has been accumulated by all of the UFO research groups, all the civilian groups, and all the books that have been written, the good books, and I'll send you a list, as the days and weeks go forward of must reading. The evidence is undeniable. The fact that we have been visited, we are being visited, that there's hybridization programs going on with the human race is beyond question. And the only thing that even the toughest skeptic and debunker needed was to have the government tell them flying saucers are real. So what I'm trying to tell you is this. There is more than sufficient evidence to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that all of this is true. And if you need more than the available evidence, then you're never going to be convinced.
Agreed. I say for me, mostly for me anyway, I make it a habit of not reading people's perspectives other than I want to, stipulate to the facts, but I see what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. And everything I've read, there's cases that I've studied from long ago that had my attention. And I couldn't quite understand why we didn't make a bigger deal than that. An example, there's a video, I believe, from the ISS where there's this object. It's moving, what looks like towards the Earth. And then out of nowhere, it stops and goes about 45 degrees the other direction instantly. And then like this other beam or maybe object flies right toward it, like it was avoiding it. And every time I watch that video, I have to take what little I know about space, the fact that it's a vacuum. And for us to change directions in space is not as simple as banking left or right. For an object to go one direction and instantly stop and go the other direction, and then something fly right where that was, why is that not spoken about more? I'm having the hardest time wrapping my head around that. That, to me, in space, I heard one guy try to tell me it was ice. Mm-hmm. And I'm in my mind like, how could you possibly think that was ice? What made it change direction so rapidly? Then now explain to me why this other object came shooting up toward it literally a second thereafter. So I think there's been compelling evidence for years, and even more so, I revert back to Barney and Betty Hill. I spoke to Kathleen Martin, and I heard their story, and everything about their story, I mean everything about it, you can't sit here and tell me these people wanted that attention. Not in that era. Not for a multi-race couple, interracial couple, I should say, in that era, and to speak of the detail and then to hear the amount of suffering Barney went through. Come on, there's no way. Those guys, there was nothing in it for them. They weren't making money. No one gave them a book deal. That was a traumatic experience for them. Not to mention their private life was now on the public stage. So yeah, there's definitely been a lot. For me, there's a lot of evidence. for the majority of humanity, you know how they are. You know, there's these people like, well, and I was guilty just once upon a time. If it's not dead on the table or it's in a cage, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be I didn't even subscribe to the idea of Bigfoot, but then I started learning how vast the forests are. I mean, not saying I'm not giving any credit to it, but how could you discredit it? And for me, this is why I'm going to do the documentary. Before I could say yay or nay to anything, I have a responsibility to go out there and really look and really try. You know, I mean, otherwise I'm just forming opinions, and what good are those? You know, you were mentioning about Dr. Leo. Is it Sprinkle?
Yes, Dr. Leo Sprinkle.
So he does. He's very accomplished in hypnotic regression. I'm kind of curious about that myself. So when he's doing these studies for people, it's helping him recall, obviously, some traumatic events around that subject. How many cases has he done?
Dr. Sprinkle, he passed away recently, unfortunately, a couple months ago. Dr. Sprinkle did write the foreword for my second book, Victoria's Secret Truth, because he is one of 3 world-class hypnotic therapists who actually regressed Victoria. He regressed her twice, and she was also regressed by Barbara Lamb and Yvonne Smith. I believe I looked up, in public records or maybe interviews that they had done for each of these individuals, and then calculated that between them, they had done about 10,000 regressions.
Oh.
So simple math, 3,333 regressions for each of them. He was a world-class expert in this. And for the audience, the listening audience who might not be familiar with it, this is not hypnotism where, the person who's being hypnotized is told to act like a monkey. What it is that it has become known that those people who have been abducted are more often than not given a false memory, which is often referred to as a screen memory. And it screens the person from what actually happened. So you mentioned the grays with the big eyes before, and they're the guys that are always leading the abductee to and fro. Well, what they'll do is they'll put a pleasant screen memory in to replace the traumatic memory that the person should have of being grabbed by the arms and led away by these large-eyed creatures. The screen memory might be of meeting an owl or a deer or something like a gentle creature that has large eyes. People will wake up and go, why was I in the forest with the deer last night? Or why was I talking to an owl this morning? It's very common. So these screen memories can be very powerful, and it keeps the memory of the event, of the abduction event, embedded in the subconscious and doesn't allow it to be brought to the conscious memory where the person can go, oh, I'm going to tell my neighbor over a cup of coffee what happened. So these regressions, they put the person into a state of relaxation. And so much so that the way that it works is the therapist tries to put the person in a safe state of mind so that they're not fearful of retribution from the people who abducted them. So, I actually have, when I wrote Victoria's Secret Truth, I actually have the recordings of her therapist putting her under, as it's called, and doing the regression. And you see how their trust is being built up and how the person's being relaxed and how they're going to focus on a certain event and how it's a safe place and that sort of thing. And so through these regressions, the therapist is able to break apart, sneak underneath, climb over, but some way get around the subconscious block that has been put in place. And then the person who is undergoing the regression finds it much easier to recall the actual events.
Huh. Well, I hear a lot of I hear a lot of success stories from that. A lot of people, they go through these regressions and afterward, they're not so tormented. I think they're at peace, because there's this thing with humans where peace of mind is a lot of strength for us psychologically, right? At least now we know. And before we close, let's get into this. I want to do a summary of what your belief system is, and then at the very tail, I want you to just name off all your books, and I'm still going to put them in the description, but I like it to be present. I like promoting. So in summary, what do you believe our visitors are? What's their purpose here?
I think the easiest framework to work around is the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And it's a really good kind of a Switzerland choice, because you'll have fanatics on both sides of that will scream over the fence at each other. So if you start somewhere in the middle there, you can nudge it to the left, nudge it to the right, but that's where I'd like to start. It just seems like they're showing up in metal craft that have accidents once in a while, that crash here and we recover. So to me, that doesn't sound like angels from heaven. What they're doing here, I think one of the things they're doing here is trying to keep us from destroying ourselves. The other thing they're doing here is that they've got a hybridization program, and they're using our DNA to create a hybrid species for reasons that I'm not even close to being smart enough to understand why. So that's kind of it in a nutshell for me.
Yeah, I mean, the hybridization I could see, because what if they can't naturally breathe the air here? And the best way for if mankind's pretty smart, we go to another planet, we find a civilization there, like, one, will study them, but how could we live there? We can't breathe their air. It would make sense to figure out, can we make them part of us? I mean, how could we? That's what I would do, right? How do we blend in with them? There would be programs. Our scientists would figure out some way to cross us over. I think so anyway.
They may need our DNA to keep themselves alive. So, eventually they're smart enough to know how to preserve their own DNA in a human hybrid. And then, it's like this Jurassic Park story, right? When they finally get the science down, they can start recreating their species, maybe in a purer form, but they've got to have some place where the seeds are stored. And it appears to me that they're storing them in the human race.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Raymond, your books, let's name them all.
There are the Alien Shades of Gray's trilogy. Alien Shades of Gray's trilogy. The first one is Evidence of Extraterrestrial Visitation to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And that was my inaugural, dipped my toe into this whole thing. The second one is Victoria's Secret Truth. It's a 2-year scientific case study that I did of Victoria Fitzpatrick, who is a lifetime experiencer, and her grandson also shows sign of having had contact. And then the final book is Swamp Gas My Ass.
I like, that's my favorite one.
And it is the true story of 2 pilots who intercepted the 1966 Michigan swamp gas UFO. They intercepted MiG-21s over the Sea of Japan after the shoot down of a Navy intelligence plane. And they also individually intercepted Russian nuclear bombers. And the book is based upon over 30 hours of interviews I did with Colonel Carroll, the personal memoirs of Colonel Nicholson that I obtained through his family, and through formally classified documents, and finally through the official personnel records of both of those American heroes. All available on Amazon. Alien Shades of Grays.
Raymond Szymanski, I enjoyed our conversation. I really did. And we're definitely going to be doing this again. Everyone listening.
Thank you. I'll be looking forward to it.
Yeah, everyone listening. I'm going to put the books in the description. I suggest you get them. I'm going to get them because I want to learn. Raymond, you have a good night, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed it. Really appreciated it.
Not a problem. I did likewise, sir.